Hello and welcome to the Car Care Auto Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2024 Hyundai Sonata, all refreshed for 2024. And in today's video, we're going to do a proper technical review under the hood. We're going to take a look at the hybrid system underneath the car, inside it, outside it, some things we like, some things we do not like, right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood, which there is a lot of surprises here. Let's get into it. This is a unique hybrid system, and in my opinion, Hyundai didn't just copy everyone else. They actually did their own thing, which I really respect and like because it works. Let's dive in. Start with the engine. The engine is a 2-liter, 4-cylinder, direct injected, non-turbo. That is a big deal here. Let's dive into some of this mechanical construction, then we'll dive into the hybrid system. So this does have a plastic valve cover. Seems actually a little better made than the previous ones that we've seen from Hyundai. Usually they're about mid-grade. This one is actually nicer, which I really like. Underneath that, there is a 2-piece cylinder head. So you have the cam cradle at the top, and then the cylinder head itself. You have hydraulic lifters and roller rockers, which is pretty cool and modern and efficient. That's the best way we're going to put it. This does not have the injectors on top of the valve cover. We'll talk about the fuel system in a little bit. But moving on from that, this has dual overhead cams with variable valve timing. Both are oil controlled. It's very simple. Solenoid just sits on the outside. This is the simplest way you're going to have an oil-controlled variable valve timing and the easiest one to service, so that's a really good thing. Now the block is an all-aluminum block that is 2 pieces. You have the block itself, and then you have kind of a lower crankcase. So the reason they do this, and we're seeing a lot of modern engines turn towards that, that piece at the bottom actually has the main caps built into it. So you don't have main caps, then a stiffening case. That contains the main caps that go on, and I guess to shorten the engine and make it smaller. That's why they're doing that. Now the fuel system in this car is direct injected only. The high pressure fuel pump does sit on top of the valve cover. It's just pretty simple, 2 bolts and comes out. That's not a big issue. But the fuel injectors themselves, the direct fuel injectors, they're actually underneath the intake manifold, which is the place you want them to be at, not on top of the valve cover. Because if you put them on top of the valve cover, it makes service extremely more complicated, because now you have to pull these every time you do a valve cover or anything with the engine. It kind of becomes cumbersome. That place underneath the intake manifold is much better. Now the cooling systems in this hybrid system, there's actually 2 cooling systems. Right now we're going to focus on the engine one. We'll talk about the hybrid one in a bit when we talk about the hybrid system. So the engine cooling system is very basic, at least in 2024 it's very basic. It does have a mechanical water pump, which is kind of a surprise. It is belt driven, and then you do have a thermal management valve that sends coolant where it needs to go for optimal efficiency and fast warm-ups, which is pretty cool. But otherwise the cooling system is pretty simple. There's not much going on with that. And lastly, on the engine itself, this engine does have an oil cooler, which is pretty cool, and it also has a variable engine oil pump. Now, what that means is the computer can control the output of the engine oil pump. That is something with modern cars, and it is there to help with efficiency. Now, one thing we skipped over, and I want to talk to it at this point, this engine does have 2 timing chains. One of them is what drives the cams to the crank, very simple, does have an internal timing chain tensioner. The other one is for the oil pump. Doesn't have a kind of a hydraulic ratcheting tensioner. It just has a little spring tensioner that holds it. Very classic design, and a design that is very robust, and I like seeing it here. Let's dive into the hybrid system, which is a very interesting and unique hybrid system. I really like it. So let's start with the transmission, because that's really what ties into it. This car does not have an ECVT or anything of that nature. It actually has a regular 6-speed automatic transmission, which I think is the coolest thing about this hybrid system. So this is a 2-motor system-ish. We'll talk about the ish part in a little bit. So between the engine and the transmission, there is one big electric motor. That is one of the motors. And between that motor and the engine, there is a clutch, a hydraulic clutch that is controlled by the same transmission fluid. And because this engine will shut off, come on, you do have an electrical oil pump that supplies pressure. So you always have pressure on that clutch should you need it. Now, let's dive into the modes of operation so this would start to make sense. First, starting with when the engine is driving the car. Battery is depleted, we need to charge it, engine is driving. The engine will come on. That clutch between the engine and the motor and the transmission will engage. So now the engine is connected to the motor, to the transmission. The engine will turn the motor and the transmission. It'll drive the car, and while it's turning that motor, it's actually also going to start generating and charging the hybrid battery. Very simple. Then let's say we switch into electric mode or EV mode, although it's not as long in this because this is not a plug-in hybrid. It has smaller battery and it's just for short periods of time you'll have EV mode. The engine will shut off. The clutch between the motor and the engine will shut off, meaning disengage, and then the electric motor will drive the transmission, and occasionally you will feel it shift while it's doing that because it's a 6-speed transmission. The last car I saw do that was a Mazda CX-90 with the plug-in hybrid model. That was really cool, that you can actually feel it shift. And this is not even a plug-in hybrid. So I'm imagining we're going to have a plug-in hybrid model that will do that, which is super cool. Now, when you drive in hybrid mode, so basically both of them are driving, the engine will be on, the clutch will be engaged, the motor will be energized to also drive. So basically the engine and the electric motor will drive the transmission, therefore drive the car. Very, very cool how they managed to not copy somebody else, but make their own system, and it works really well. Now, initially we said there was 2 motors-ish. Let's talk about that part, because this is where the compromise have to come in. I mean, the truth have to be said. Toyota were the ones that kind of pioneered hybrids, and they really took first place in taking all the good ideas. So everybody else kind of had to make small compromises. And here's the biggest one. The second motor takes the place of where your standard car non-hybrid alternator would go. It's called the HSG, Hybrid Starter Generator. It basically starts the engine and charges the battery as we go. That's what it does. But how is it going to start the battery if it's where the alternator goes? Yes. This is another car that uses the drive belt to start the engine, and then the engine, once it comes on, it will spin that giant motor and generate. Not the best idea. I mean, it works. Don't get me wrong, it works. But just know, if you own one of these cars, the belt and the tensioner become a vital component of the car. Usually, I mean, it's important, but it's not the end of the world. This, if you break the belt, it might be game over until you get it fixed. So this has a very heavy-duty belt and a very heavy-duty tensioner, and that particular HSG, which is where the alternator is, it is coolant cooled by the second cooling system. So that cooling system cools the brain of the operation, which we'll talk about in a second here. It does cool that motor. It does cool the other motor, which is pretty standard. This is an electric water pump, has a separate container, and it's a whole separate system with a separate radiator. And then right next to the engine sits something called the HCPU. This is the brain of the operation. This is what sends power to the motor. When the motor starts free spinning, it like being turned by the engine and it's generating, it sends that power to the battery. This is the brain of the operation. And also inside of here is your DC to DC converter. So that takes the place of your actual alternator. It takes the high voltage from the battery, steps it down to 12 volt to power your electronics and charge the 12 volt battery. That also lives in here. Now this car HVAC system is pretty standard. It does have an electric AC compressor, which is pretty standard with hybrids. Now, the battery, let's talk about the battery real quick. This is a 270 volt battery. It's a lithium ion. It sits in the best place you can have a hybrid battery, which is underneath the back seat. It is air cooled. It's a pretty neat packaging. I love that they didn't intrude on the back seat at all with this hybrid battery. It does have a vent in the back that you got to keep clear from debris and blockage to make sure that the battery stays cool, because that's usually the #1 thing that would affect hybrid batteries' longevity. Now, how does this entire hybrid system actually work in the real world? It works flawlessly. The truth have to be said. They did this super well. The transitions, usually when you have a system with a clutch, it is very clunky and just not efficient and all that. This one, super smooth. I mean, you don't even feel the transitions. When it goes into EV mode and you're not really pushing it, you actually feel the transmission shift, which is super cool to feel in a hybrid. And then when the engine comes on and you start driving, it's a 6-speed transmission. There's no CVT drone, there's no delays, or everything is immediate. I love it. I think they really did this one well. Now, as a mechanic looking under the hood, I admire that there are a few things that are actually higher quality than usual with Hyundai. And I really like that, including the HPCU. The only concern I have with it is it's massive. That's usually other hybrids will have it much smaller. This one is massive and it takes a lot of space. That's why the battery is no longer here. It's all the way in the back. Not a huge sacrifice. A lot of hybrids have had it this way because of this unit. But looking around things, a lot of things I really like. One example of the things I like, the fittings and the cooling system, I really like them, especially on the hybrid side. They're all this quick disconnect, yes, but it's a high quality one with a hose and clamp attached to it. That's how you do it properly. With the exception of one hose that I could find that I just feel like it's an afterthought and something, why did he do this? Can we put a hose and clamp? Except the one that goes to the engine coolant bottle. I really wish they didn't do that, but it's the super flimsy, plasticky hose that will probably be the first thing that breaks on this car. Wish they didn't do that, but the good news is I don't see that everywhere else. I just see this one. Something super cool that I noticed about this car, and if you work on cars, you will appreciate this. The hood cable. Usually the hood cable will go from the latch all the way inside the car. It's one piece, and if it rusts, breaks, or whatever the case may be, you have to tear into this whole thing just to get it. This one is a two-piece and has a little connect point right here. This may seem such an insignificant thing, and they probably, just knowing car engineers, they didn't do it for us, but we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. This is a great idea. And if I can see this, I am hoping there's 10 more other things like that that I don't see, and we welcome those, even though they were not meant for mechanics, just probably for production. And the last thing, this is just a very funny observation. This car, I think, don't quote me on this, but just we'll say this on this video, has the longest intake tube you will ever see in a car. So it goes all the way from the air box, which 90% of cars, the air filter will be on this side of the car, not on the other side. This one, because the HPCU is so massive, they have to put it on that side, but the throttle body is on this side. So it literally have to make a giant turn all around the engine, all down, just to make it into the intake. Just thought I'd mention that because I thought that was pretty interesting. Let's take a look underneath the 2024 Sonata Hybrid. Everything is covered in the front. I do like that they give you separate doors for the oil change. You don't have to pull down the entire cover, but for everything else, you do have to pull the entire cover. With that, let's look at the front suspension here. So we got an aluminum control arm with the ball joint that is part of it, which that was a separate design, but it's not. Aluminum knuckle, single piston caliper. It's actually I think it is at least to me, it looks like kind of a bigger caliper. You do have a McPherson strut design, very familiar, very simple. That's what you want to see in cars like this. This is a steel sway bar, which is nice to see. They're all going to aluminum or the plastic inside ones. This one is actually full steel, which is nice. As we walk away from that, we come to this area. You notice everything is very well covered. And this is really what helps how this car drives. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The exhaust is, I feel like this particular section of the exhaust is well made. Everything else, typical Hyundai stuff, not the highest quality in the world, but not the worst. Look at this part of the exhaust. This is very interesting. Toyota actually used a similar design and some other manufacturers. So they have coolant going to the catalytic converter and then returning. The idea of this is they want to warm up this coolant quickly. So the catalytic converter gets really hot really quick. So this warms up the coolant, sends it back to the engine. Pretty good idea. It does have a little bit of piping, and if coolant decides to leak into the exhaust, that's kind of a problem. No history of that with this, but that has happened with other models. Other than that, the exhaust comes out and kind of makes this very interesting turn. This is the part of the exhaust that just feels very cheap. The truth have to be said. They're not the longest lasting exhaust in the world. The fuel tank is here. I don't know why they didn't do a saddle fuel tank and have this exhaust come out straight. They didn't do that. Instead, they curved the exhaust like that. It's a very interesting shape to the exhaust. Moving past the exhaust to the rear suspension. This is a multi-link, multi-arm suspension. Pretty much every single car in the automotive industry today, normal cars, will have this style of suspension. You do have a aluminum knuckle, pretty standard again. Everything else is steel, which I really like that. When you wrap around, we do have a single piston caliper in the back with electronic parking brake. That's also becoming the standard of the automotive industry. Now the sway bar in the back, it is a steel body, but if you look at the inside, if I'm not mistaken, there is a plastic inside. I wish they didn't do that, but they did, and that's how they did this. Now the exhaust does come out on one side. It's a hybrid, we're not expecting dual. However, it looks like they do have space for another one. Maybe the N-line model, the non-hybrid. They did cover this somewhat well, but this is again a fashion with the automotive industry. This is wide open. I mean, I literally can see parking sensors right there that get covered with mud and everything. That's the downside of that. There's one thing we missed in the front that is extremely interesting. We're going to try our best to show you here. First, let's look at this axle. It's a normal front CV axle. Nothing really special about it. It looks decently built and everything. Then we look at this side. Yeah, that is a massive axle. This looks like an axle you'll see in an electric car. I mean, this is just way overkill, folks. You do not need an axle this big. But they didn't say it in the technical data, but this is my guesstimation. Because this style, usually this is a wide car. Usually when we put an axle on the passenger side, we'll have some kind of support bearing in the middle. This one doesn't have it. So I imagine they put this massive, way overkill axle for what power this car makes because it does not have a center support bearing. They figured it's a longer axle. We're going to need a stronger axle. It's just interesting that one side is like that, the other side is a normal axle. That was pretty cool. Let's take a look at the outside of the Hyundai Sonata. Now initially when you look at it, it has a very interesting futuristic look. But I have mixed feelings about this look. See, Hyundai in 2024, this is a mid-year refresh, it's not a full redesign. They actually changed almost the whole front and almost their whole back. That's according to them. They really wanted to make this refresh strong, not just minor. So the problem with this car, initially when you see it, it looks very futuristic, very cool. But the more time you spend with it, the more you look at it, it simply has too much going on. And the problem with cars that have too much going on is they don't age well. That's the problem. So for example, we look at the front. We have this very long bar light in the front. Looks super cool at night. It's actually a really nice touch. And then the headlights are all the way down here. This is something that Hyundai has been doing for some time. And then they're trying to emphasize the lines going this way instead of across. That's what the main thing with the redesign is. It looks cool, but I feel like there's a lot going on. It's not gonna kind of appeal to everyone. That's the only downside of this. For example, we look at the hood. You have this line here, and then a raise and another line, then this line comes down, and then another line, and then down. It's just a lot going on. Hyundai badge right here. Hyundai always have put their radar sensors very low to the ground, which I wish they don't, because that has front row seat to any accidents. And then this continues when you wrap around the side. I think this is very elegant. The turn signal is right here. Just looks very cool. But then as a result of this little thing, we have these two lines that kind of come in, get skinnier, and then they grow wider again. That's okay. That's kind of following the shape of the car. But then we have this other line that kind of starts here, disappears, and then starts again and goes all the way down. Too much going on is the word. That's what we're going to use. I love that the mirrors they're smaller, but they're still a decent enough size. So I like that they didn't compromise function. As we wrap our way around the back, it is the same story. Initially, it looks great when you look at it. But the more time you spend with it, the more you realize there's a lot going on. So one thing they wanted to emphasize, I feel like there's a giant H here for a Hyundai. They're really trying to work on that lately. This black part of the bumper is something that has to do with the update. So the fascia of the bumper changed. So what they're trying to do here, and this is, I can see what they're trying to do. They're trying to integrate the wing into the design. That's why they left this as a body color, and this is black, and this is a different color. Kind of wanting to give it a wing without actually giving it a wing. I suppose it works, but still, there's too much going on here. This is not even the sport model. So, one thing I really appreciate, they kept things simple in the back. Hyundai logo inside the taillight. Sonata written in a very cool font. I really like when they do stuff like this. Hybrid. That's it. We don't need to put 17 million badges. No, just kept it simple. That's all information you need to know when you look at this car. But something that is super cool about this car, that's a power trunk. That's unheard of in this segment. Camry doesn't have it. The Accord doesn't have it. This one has a powered trunk on a sedan. That is usually reserved for like Lexus, Acura, Genesis, not the everyday midsize sedans. This one has it, which is very cool. Pretty large trunk. I really like it. It's a proper of this size of sedan. Now we do have some storage here, but unfortunately we do not have a spare tire. It looks like we have a perfect spot for a spare tire, but no spare tire. Maybe it's an option. Instead, we get the tire mobility kit, which equals you will need AAA or something, because when you have a spare tire, that's when the tire shreds itself, you're not going to be able to do much with that tire mobility kit. I really like this. And not only is it a power trunk, it's to close and to lock the car. You won't find this in another car in this segment unless this is going to start a trend. They're all going to have it next year. But here is a small problem I have with all new Hyundais. I have to say the truth. The key. The key, initially when you look at it, super cool Hyundai logo. Wow, they really did this well. Except I imagine, we've said this a lot in the Hyundai videos that have this key. Somebody in the back of the room, when they were designing this key, they were all clapping that they made this very cool key, said, sir, we didn't put a mechanical key. So their answer to that is, yes, this is the key of the car, this entire thing, because this is the mechanical key. And this thing is I have lost it already like 4 or 5 times in my pocket because it loves to fall off. Because as soon as you do this, it just falls off. This is a terrible idea and a terrible afterthought. And in a car like this, you will need that. As we'll talk about it in a little bit, you do need that. So in case you do need that, let me show you how this works. So you notice there's nothing. There's actually a little cover. You have to take the key, not lose this, hopefully. I'm going to put it on the roof, probably forget it. You're going to open this. Well, you can't open this because the car door is locked. You're going to put the key here and then slide this out, and hopefully it'll come out like so. Then you can insert the key, which I already put backwards. Then you can insert the key and lock and unlock. But just know one thing, is during our we always test these. You can't clip this straight on. You have to go on the side and kind of clip it in, and then it doesn't want to sit. You have to fight it for a little bit. There we go. I don't know why car manufacturers do this. I don't know why they put a key in this complicated contraption and then they cover this. Nobody will ever complain that there's a keyhole there, because when you need it, you're going to be glad that it's not covered by some flimsy cover that you'll end up breaking because you don't know how to take it off. I think every car owner should know how this works in case of an emergency when they buy the car. Let's take a look at the interior of the 24 Hyundai Sonata, which they really kind of started all over almost. They really went all out here, and this is not even a full redesign. This is a mid-year refresh, but it is very welcome because they did a lot of things really well. First, we look at the whole thing. It feels very elegant and just understated. Simple. Yes, you have a giant screen and everything, but if you look at everything else, they simplified things. I feel like the previous model just had a lot going on to it. This one feels simpler. It's very elegant. Now the materials, they did not use the highest end materials like they did in the likes of the Palisade calligraphy, but the materials are really on the nicer side of things in this segment. I really think they did that very well. Now the seats are super comfortable. They do have a little bit of a pattern in the middle of them. I really like them. They're not the nicest Napa leather like the one you find in the calligraphy models, but It is very nice indeed. The other stuff they did is a very smart integration of like your touch stuff and the screens. They did that very well. I usually dislike cars that ditch the physical controls for screens, but this one they did it. They kind of gave you both the best of both worlds. The HVAC controls, it's a screen, but it's a dedicated screen to that with two physical knobs. So now you don't have to fumble through the infotainment system to change something. No, it's always lit and visible in front of you, and you can just touch it and operate it. I think that is a good compromise between the two. Now, the infotainment system is the latest iteration of the infotainment system from Hyundai. It does have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is really nice. It does work very well. They got rid of a lot of the gimmicky stuff they used to have from the past that did absolutely nothing. They simplified it. It works very well, and I really like that. Now, the gauge is a screen. It's kind of a continuous screen, which depends how you look at it. Some people will like it, some people won't. I think it fits the interior very well. They didn't just slap it on there and hope for the best, because they really redesigned this whole interior. Now, other than the turn signal that shows you the blind spot, which is cool but not exclusive, they've been doing this for a while, there is not much else that this screen does that a regular gauges with a little screen in the middle would do, except one thing which I really think is kind of unique. So the speedometer has a dot that shows you the speed limit. That dot is the speed limit. As soon as you cross it, it actually turns red and starts flashing. I think that's a pretty cool kind of quick glance. You can see where you're at relevant to the speed limit, which is nice. Now the shifter is from the Ioniq 5, which I really dislike. It kind of plays mind tricks with you until you get used to it, because I feel like it's backwards, but that might be just me. I'll just give you a heads up. If you get in this car, pay attention to the shifter, because you might shift into drive and you're actually in reverse. So think about the shifter. I really dislike the shifter. And then the steering wheel also got updated. I love that they kept things simple. You do have a rotary knob for the volume on it. It's very simple steering wheel that anybody can operate within a few minutes of sitting in this car, and I really like that. Now they got rid of their Hyundai logo. They have 4 dots, which according to them is Morse code for H from the Hyundai. I guess that works. Now there is one interesting feature here. If you look next to the steering wheel, there's a button that says 12-volt battery reset. When you press it, it just says you're not ready for a reset, basically. Here's what that does, and this is, I think, is a pretty cool feature. So if the car, while it's locked and off, detects parasitic draw, what that means is there's something drawing the 12-volt battery that is abnormal. It's actually going to completely disable the electric system, and the car will appear dead as the battery is dead. You're going to use your key, like we showed you when we look outside the car, to open the door, get in, press that button, and then it'll reset things and your battery is not dead. So I think that's a pretty cool feature in case you left something on or something is going on with the car. It won't just completely kill the battery. You have a way of kind of bringing it up and let's get going until we figure out what's going on with it. I think that is a pretty cool feature. Another thing that they've done in other cars, but I think it's pretty cool that they put it here as well. When you look at your USB-C ports, one of them has a button to switch the mode. Do you want it to be just to charge your phone, or do you want it to connect to the car and charge your phone? You'll ask some people, they'll say this is overkill, but I think it's actually pretty cool. What if you just want to charge something and you don't want it to connect to the car? That is pretty cool. Now, driving this car, and we've talked about the powertrain, how refined it is, it really makes a huge difference here, but this interior, they've done it really well. The truth has to be said. For a mid-year refresh, this doesn't feel like a mid-year refresh. It's such an sophisticated place to be. I mean, I love this, probably fake, wooden pattern here. It just looks so sophisticated. You're not sitting in a Genesis here, it's a Hyundai, but still, we can have nice things in an everyday car. And the other thing is, this cabin is very insulated for a segment. It's not luxury quiet, but it is pretty insulated, even at highway speeds. It's pretty insulated. And the way the suspension is tuned, everything, it's a very nice place to be. And my hat goes off to them because they really did this one well. With the exception of the shifter, I wish they just left the buttons from the previous model, but you can't have everything. Nothing's perfect in life, right? Let's talk about the back seat of the Hyundai Sonata. I'm 5'7". This is my driving position. I have decent knee room. I have decent headroom, even though this has a panoramic sunroof. I really like being back here, with the exception of one thing. very cheapo plastic thing here. I mean, the seat is not wrapped in the nicest leather on the planet, but it's nice. But you get this hard plastic here, kind of. I understand in the segment, but I wish it was wrapped around. But to make up for that, they did give you a shade here, which is kind of difficult to put on. I wish they would have done this a little bit better, but hey, you got a shade to make up for that. Some USB-Cs here, some rear vents, which I really like. But the coolest thing is, underneath the seat is a hybrid battery, as we talked about it. But even with it being here, it doesn't really affect the dimensions here as much. Still a very comfortable place to be. Still have decent headroom, decent knee room. It's a very comfortable seat to be in, and that is pretty cool. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the 2024 Hyundai Sonata. First one is the looks. Although initially it'll give you a striking feeling like, wow, look at this futuristic design, the more time you spend with it, the more you realize there's simply too much going on. And I fear that cars that look like this, they don't age well. 5 years from now, you look at this and it's just gonna feel like too much going on. It's gonna lose its futuristic look and it's just gonna look like an outdated 80s spaceship. That's a reference to that. If you look at the previous generation Sonatas, some of them didn't age very well because of their futuristic look. That's a matter of taste though, and that's not the end of the world. But there's one thing I really dislike about this car. That would be the shifter. See, when we reviewed the Ioniq 5, which was an electric car, which was very futuristic looking thing, that was fine. I mean, it's an electric car, there's a lot going on, but unfortunately, Hyundai decided to move all their cars into that strange shifter. That shifter is backwards. Maybe it is not to you, but to me it is. If you're trying to mimic a column shifter, it is backwards. So it's going to take most average Joe that is not into cars a minute to get used to it, and it could create a dangerous situation. So please, if you end up buying one of these or you own one, always pay attention to the shifter until you're 100% used to it, because for a second, it will play a mind trick on you and it feels like it's backwards. So should you buy a 2024 Hyundai Sonata Hybrid? Folks, this is truly an impressive car. Truth have to be said. See, I'm mostly impressed with the hybrid system itself. Usually, this orientation hybrid system with a clutch is either not very efficient or clunky, or usually both. This one is neither. It's super smooth, the transitions are very smooth, and then when you're driving, like with the engine on, this has a 6-speed transmission. Usually hybrids in this segment, they will have some sort of CVT, which will drone and drone and drone while they drive fine, but it is annoying. This one just has a normal 6-speed transmission, which is really cool. And the transitions are super smooth between, and when the clutch engages, the clutch is pretty fast and it doesn't jar or anything. I really like that. And then moving on to the car itself, the interior is truly nice. I mean, they've really went to lengths to make this super nice. This is not a luxury car. They don't use super high-end materials, but everything inside is very nice. It's very eye-pleasing, very easy to use. I like they didn't really go all futuristic where you have to do everything on the screen. No, you still have very cleverly placed controls that make this car super simple to operate. But what I love most about this is the trims. You don't have 17 million trims and 19 million packages and options and all the confusion. You actually don't have any of that in 24. You only have 4 trims with no packages or options. 2 hybrids, 2 non-hybrids, with the N-Line, the sporty model, being a non-hybrid, which makes sense. It's as simple as I'm going to put it. And at its lower trim, which is the SEL, both the hybrid and the non-hybrid, it's actually a pretty well-optioned car for its price. I mean, car prices in 24 new car prices have been really high. This one I feel like is not as high once you look at everything that the package offers. At the base model level, it is pretty well optioned. I don't really like that. Now, no car is ever perfect. Of course, there are a few things with this. Although this car does come with Hyundai's 10-year powertrain warranty and all that, past that warranty, reliability will still be a question mark. We hope it lasts, but looking around, certain things will not, and that's the reality of things. The other thing is the looks. While these looks will initially wow everyone, and it looks super futuristic, super cool, typically, historically, cars that had kind of futuristic designs, didn't age very well, because in 5 years from now, this might not be the best looking car in the world. That's the problem with looks like that. That's why we always say less is more when it comes to car design, because then the designs are simple, elegant, and they last longer. This one, it has too much going on in the design. That's one thing about it. Folks, I hope this video was helpful or informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.